Welcome to Project Chatter, the podcast where PPM experts from various sectors talk about the latest trends. Listen to Val and Dale as they talk about tried and tested best practices and share their unfiltered thoughts about the industry. Whether you're here to learn how to progress your career, improve your project control skills, or just want to hear an Aussie and South African rant about projects, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Project Chatter podcast with your hosts, Dale Fung and Val Matthews.
In this episode, we talk to Dawn Mahan. Dawn is the founder of PMO Training LLC and the author of an Amazon #1 bestseller, Meet the Players in Project Land, and the best-selling new release, Project Land Goes to the Movies.
She is a PMI certified leader, dynamic international speaker, and inventor of the Project Flow process learning system, known for making complex project management concepts fast, easy, and practical. She has trained thousands of professionals worldwide and works with executives and PMO leaders globally. Dawn was fantastic, Val. I loved exploring the movies and the various applications and scenes with her. But what are some of the things that really stood out for you that's different to any other podcast we've had?
I think just the coined term Project Land and using a different way to communicate difficult things on projects and understanding that projects under pressure require communication. We talked about communication quite a bit and education as well. So yeah, something for the listeners, definitely. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We mentioned on the pod where we often pay as lip service, and with all the chat and with everything you're seeing online around AI, it's great to be reminded of what actually really is important. And we shouldn't forget how important communication skills actually are. But there's more than just comms. We won't spoil it for you folks. We'll leave it there. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of your favorite Project Chatter podcast. It's here. And Dale, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks, Val. Can you believe it? We've got the third heat wave in the UK. We might as well be in Australia or South Africa, enjoying the sunshine and the warmth. Many people are complaining, but not the South African. I'm loving it.
Perfect, mate. No, I'm very jealous. It's sub cold here. It's 0 degrees, 2 degrees, 5 degrees. So we are struggling, but only for a couple of weeks. As you know, Australia is always warm. But look, let's get our guest into it. We've been talking online or offline for a while now, but would love to get you on the pod. And for the first time, Dawn, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
No, it's great having new guests and new topics to talk about. But as usual, we love to hear origin stories, how people get into projects, because it's not always the same way, and it's usually an interesting story. So, Dawn, how did you get into projects?
Well, I was the only woman in my class of IT consultants that started to solve the year 2000 problem, which, as you know, we did. And so I was a coder at first, and then I ended up getting called one day by one of the guys that was a salesperson who said, "Your boss is going to come after you today and I need you to say yes." I'm like, "What?" And he said, "I was working on this gig. It's the biggest deal in the city. I finally got it. It's the new internet bank. It was the biggest deal that he had ever done." And he said, "They want to send this guy to be the project manager, and he's not a fit for their culture with the foosball tables and video games and whatnot. And so I asked specifically for you. And so I need you to say yes." I said, "Wait, you want me to do what?" He said, "I need you to manage the project." And that was the first time it happened for me. So I got a call out of the blue.
Wow. And what did you do then?
Well, I was lucky that they didn't let me fail, which was his promise. And then, of course, you just get bigger, hairier, scarier projects after you do a good job with one. You just keep getting them. And then I became a PMO leader. So in that organization, the same IT consulting company, I had the chance to advise on PMOs, et cetera. And then I ended up defecting and going to a Fortune 500 company and leading their IT PMO. And then we showed them what good looks like. And so more people started to come to us outside of IT for help, and which was really, really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting journey there, Dawn, because, we ask a lot of people how they fell into the profession, and everyone's got their own unique story. Often it involves people, though, that give us the opportunity and believe in us and are there to coach and mentor and, give us the advice that we need when we're a bit younger. And
Yeah, I was
so,
so lucky with that. I mean,
mm,
when they made the promise, we're not going to let you fail, they did it for themselves because they couldn't let this big deal fall through. But they also were really kind about it. And there were no women, they were all men, and they really surrounded me and helped me learn and do what I needed to do to be successful. So I'm always grateful for all the support from the wonderful men that have helped me in technology over the years.
yeah, and we've had over the years of this podcast talking about women in projects and sort of diversity of thought and all of that coming into it. And what's I think been a hidden or disguised blessing in a sense is that we haven't had people coming on to wanting to talk about these topics anymore because it's not a thing. It doesn't matter about gender anymore. We have representation, we have diversity of thought, we have various genders, which is fantastic in projects. And so I think we've come a long way, and we've been lucky to have a front row seat, Val, to seeing the evolution of the
Absolutely.
profession. But really excited to talk to you, Dawn, and get stuck into some of the things you've been thinking about and doing as well. And I love the topic that I've told you this already. I love the topic that you've shared, and I want to get stuck into it straight away. And you've brought forward why movies are surprisingly effective tools for improving project leadership, communication, and team alignment. Now, I love a good movie, just as most others do, but I've never linked the two between project leadership, communication, and team alignment. What are the links? Where do we start with this?
Well, that's interesting that you haven't, and I'm so glad to talk about it because we just put out a best-selling book. It was a #1 Amazon hot new release as well, 2026, so brand new. So happy to get to talk to you guys about it when it's so new off the presses. And what we did was my co-editor and I, Jerry Manis, who's also an expert in our field here, we looked at the list of 50 books that we could write between the two of us together, and we said, which one would be the most fun? Not the easiest, but the most fun. And so Project Land Goes to the Movies was born. And the reason is because over the years, so after, working in technology and then going off on my own and starting my own firm, I started to realize that especially when people are new to Project Land, which is the term I coined to explain the world of projects and how it's different than your day job. What I realized is analogies, metaphors, anything, I will use anything to connect the dots for people that are new to our world. And so movies are one way that are really natural to do that. So, for example, one of the authors who's in England actually wrote about Apollo 13. And in Apollo 13, there are so many great lessons, but the movie moment he chose is the one that was most memorable to me, which was when the engineers are trying to figure out, like with a sock and with, the things that the astronauts have up there, how to literally put a square peg in a round hole so that they can bring the astronauts home. And what that looked like in real life. And that movie is based on real life happenings. And so I was just, thinking about all of the times when you felt like your project team didn't have enough time, had a really weird problem to solve, and they needed to be motivated. And sometimes, especially later in your career as a project manager, you see this kind of thing coming. You're like, we're going into this phase that's going to be tough. Well, wouldn't it be nice before you get into the phase that's going to be tough, if you, let's say, show that clip and say, hey guys, we're going into this phase that's going to be tough. There might be moments like this that happen. or we have to solve some problem we don't know. The clock's going to be ticking. How are we going to act? How are we going to behave together? How can we best work together if and when that happens? Because it probably will.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. As you're talking there, I was actually thinking, I've been very fortunate through this podcast. I've got opportunities, and I actually hosted industry awards in London for 3 years. And on my last sort of hosting, I actually was I was challenged to put in Anchorman quotes into the awards ceremony, and if I did, then people would donate money for charity.
Ooh.
And so I raised £2,000 just doing this.
Well done.
And I still remember it was classic because those that knew in the audience. And so there was actually this coincidence where someone from my team actually ended up winning an award. And my response afterwards was, "Oh, Sue," my co-host, "Oh, Sue, I'm in a glass cage of emotion." And from Anchorman.
Wow.
And everyone loved that knew, but then the others that heard it also laughed. And that brought a bit of humor to the profession as well. So maybe there was a bit of me that actually knew this all along, and you've just actually made it obvious to me. But what are some of the, I guess, examples of movie quotes or scenes that you've particularly used that have helped various project teams in situations? Are there any specific ones, or do you use this as a technique often? Do you encourage people to use movies?
Yeah, we absolutely encourage people to use movies. And in fact, one of our authors from Wales, he works in the public sector, and he works with public health people. So nurses, doctors, people who are not going to study project management, but who still get involved in projects. And so his chapter was on The Martian with Matt Damon. And so Matt Damon, the astronaut, has to bring himself home. And there's a famous quote about, "I'm going to have to science the shit out of it." Right? Do you remember this? And
Yes,
so
I
famous
remember
quote. And so one of the things that James does, and what he shared with us, which just made my heart sing, because this is what you imagine when you envision a book like this. He said, we brought some of these lessons and clips into the room with people, nurses, doctors, other people, the administrators there. They don't understand what Agile is. And I show them The Martian and how he's iterating to bring himself home. And they're like, "Oh, that's what Agile is? Oh, okay." So it just, these complex concepts don't necessarily need 47 slides and, a gallon of coffee to get you through it, to be able to help people, especially on the teams, maybe executives that have a different mindset or a different expertise, to understand what we're trying to communicate, because communication is really the glue that keeps everything together, but also the WD-40 that helps keep everything running smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about gallons of coffee, I'm sure Val's caffeine's hit in now because it's early hours of the morning, as he's saying. Val, you love a movie as much as any other, and we've spoken about plenty of movies. What would be your go-to scene, when the shit's like, when you're really in the shits and you're in the doldrums and you want to get them out? What would you play?
There are so many movies. I was just thinking back to the Apollo 13, that exact analogy, or at least that scene when they emptied all the stuff on the table for Apollo 13.
Isn't it great?
Dawn. It's such a great story because it literally is life or death as well. Now, projects aren't life and death, so I try not to be that exaggerated in Australia because they get worried. But Australia's culture, you've got to be more laid back. But I always I love the Matrix series. They're so fantastic. So the coming up against Agent Smith, and you can paint Agent Smith as whoever you like. But that ability to believe, right? And I think you're right. The translation of getting a team together and believing in one common cause and one focus. I use the Matrix a lot because that is Neo. When he starts to believe, I don't know if you remember in the end of Matrix 1, he kind of turns around Agent Smith, and that's when he says no, and the bullets go flying and he says no, and just stops the bullets, and there's an opportunity there to just take a snippet, like you said, Dawn, take a part of a movie that translates really well and then build a story on top of that. So the Matrix is a really, really good one that I use.
Do you offer them the blue or red pill option?
I think once you're in project management, you've already picked, you're already in. That's it. And you said, why didn't I take the blue pill, and it's Once you realize how projects are pulled together, and I think that's something interesting as well from the public's perspective of what projects are. I don't know if you've ever tried to explain what you do, Dawn and Dale, to your family who are not haven't taken the red pill, and you're trying to explain what you do on the day-to-day, and they're just looking at you like, what? So maybe they need to understand, and then you might use movies as an analogy to talk about what you do for work. But it's a very different environment once you're in a project, because everyone assumes that projects are very well organized because we have Agile and we have all these principles and we have methodologies and we have senior leadership and we have this big budget. But actually, most projects that I've been on, and Dale will, I'm sure he'll affirm this, is it's heroic efforts, it's teamwork, it's culture, it's working together in one common direction and knowing what you're actually trying to achieve. Now, I'm ex-defense, so we talk about missions a lot and objectives and outcomes, but anything that gets the traction on the ground, and everybody's motivated differently. Dawn, do you find this? And so I think your analogy and your position of Project Land, coining that term, Project Land, I think that's fantastic because it's very easy to understand. It sounds like it's a theme park, actually. So maybe that's the next thing after the book is can we go to Project Land, Dad? We take the kids to Project Land and they can do a Gantt chart and they can draw up a cost report for us, But where did the term come from? I want to get back to this Project Land piece because I love this. How do you describe that to people who don't know what that is?
Well, where it came from was also by accident. So basically, my whole life and career has been a series of accidents. But maybe it's all by design. The screenwriters in the background doing their thing. But it was by accident. I was standing in front of a room full of professionals who were really worried because they had a new boss, and the new boss was saying, you are going to have to learn how to do projects. And she brought me in because she had worked with me before to teach them about the basics of project management. Now, they were all operations people. They were all excellent. They were all experienced. And I was trying to help them understand why projects are so different and why the world of projects is so difficult sometimes. And so I blurted out, we should just call it something different. We should call it something like, I don't know, Project Land. And then I kind of forgot about it. And the next week I was walking through the hall to go speak with the training sponsor. And I was walking by two of the guys that had been in the class, and they were just speaking to one another, and I didn't really want to, interrupt them. So I walked by and I just sort of waved. But then I passed them and I overheard one say to the other, dude, it's Project Land. It's different. And I was like, wait, what? So I backed up and I said, did I just hear what did you just say? And yes, I was so dumbfounded. Wow. And he said, yeah, that really helped me. And so I thought, oh, okay, maybe finally I stumbled my way into figuring out how to explain this finally. And so that many years later, we have 2 books with Project Land on the covers because it has stuck. Just to help people understand, it's different than the day job. The rules don't apply. The roles are different as well. And then they go, oh, okay, it's different. Okay, tell me more about this. How can I be successful in this world? And so it's helped, the thousands of people that have now been introduced to Project Land.
That's fantastic. I think as well, when we talk about communication, there's something about inherently storytelling, the art of storytelling when we present. And I think when we definitely when we're coming up the ranks, if we've got a great leader or a mentor who can paint the picture effectively, we use this language all the time, visualize what we're going through or about to go through. And we call this preframing where I come from. So we kind of pre-frame or preload them with the right information, going back to the matrix, right? If you could load them up with all the project scientific data and all the methodologies and all the books, they become the best. They become the one, but that's never going to happen day one. And so how do you slowly release information to them, and how do they transcribe or translate it back into their own understanding of what's going on? And like you said, if you can take out the complexity of everything, because it could be very overwhelming. And I think Dale knows this as well. I started my first project and I literally was in the Navy. I walked across the road to a company called Talus, and I was still in my dirty overalls, and I sat down with a guy called John Ulitzi. Shout out to John. And I said, John, I heard you got jobs going. And he said, yeah, I do, in project controls. Have you heard of project controls? I said, no. And he said, do you want a job here? I said, well, I'll have a crack. That's a very Australian thing to say. And he put me in an assistant project controller role. And I remember the very first day, and I sat there, and I was sitting with an old guy called Tom Shepard. He was a master planner. He'd been doing project planning for about 40 years. So he was an old soul in his 60s, ready for retirement. He should have retired much earlier. And I said, John, this is just so much information. It was a Navy project. It was US software. It was lots of different people running around doing stuff, but completely different to the military. Completely different. I said, John, how am I going to get my head around this? And he said, man, it's just lines and charts, dude. You'll be fine. Lines and charts. That's what he said. He said, if you can read these lines and charts, you'll know more than the executives. And so I sat and I learned with him, and he had a very nice way of delivering this stuff. Very patient guy, very slow, methodical. Again, he did everything pen and paper. Like he would use Primavera, or I think it was P3E or maybe SureTrack back then. That's how old I am. And he would sit there and he would draw it out and tell me how exactly he came up with all the calculations. And he would just draw boxes and lines and boxes. And he would say, this one can't start before this one. And this is how you do a forwards pass. And what is a backwards pass? And think about rugby, And so he would kind of add anecdotes and stories as he was explaining it. And I think that's how I kind of got the concepts. And then because they were very manual and very visual, I was able to then take that information, and then new people who came on the project, I was able to then pass it on. And I think, Dawn, with your concept of Project Land, that's the same approach. Is if you see a movie and someone shares with you a really good way to translate, you can pass that learning on relatively quickly. And I think the challenge with people in Project Land, I can use that now, Dale. We can use this in our speeches. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Is people in Project Land is the speed of communication and the ability to learn quickly is part of the prerequisites of being on a project. We have a very tight time frame usually, or we're already late when you join a project and you're like, okay, we need to unscramble some of this stuff. How do we do that? What's your technique if I'll just talk about projects that are already ongoing. You land in a project, Dawn. What's the first thing you kind of assemble and get yourself oriented around so that you can learn on the project?
Well, it always felt like, and this used to happen to me when I was an IT consultant and, an IT consultant project manager, where I would get parachuted in to the client's version of Project Land and have to figure out like who are the enemies, who are the friendlies, what the heck is going on here. And so of course there's show me all the artifacts, but there's talking to people, and there's also feeling the vibe of how are people feeling, which I had to learn the hard way. So to me, I was trying to sense, at what level of stress is it? Is it at tilt? Are they really overboard now? Or are they at a point where they don't care? They just don't care anymore. And it matters. It matters to know what the vibe is so that you can help motivate them in the right direction. So, Val, during prep here, we were talking about the people side. And so to me, for projects to be successful, the people have to be set up for success. And it's so many times not happening. And that's really become my passion over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting points there. I mean, I love sticking with the movie theme, and you talk about projects and being successful, and you typically bringing a whole bunch of people from different backgrounds and skill sets together to, achieve this common goal. And for me, it should be a lot like Remember the Titans, right? It should be like that. But I think of a lot of the projects that I work on, and it actually feels more like Game of Thrones, where people are fighting with each other over territory and who's got the biggest team, and, that's mine, don't touch it. And I'm like, guys, you realize that regardless if you're, the GC, the owner, part of the supply chain, you're all trying to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. And why is it so hard? Because we've explored this with multiple people, and some say it's leadership, others say it's the nature of the commercial setup with the different contracts and the friction in that and the capitalist system that we're in. Others say it's the culture and trying to have multiple different cultures work together. Others say that it's the incentives aren't in alignment. Others say it's all of the above. Do you find like a common theme of why teams don't particularly work well together?
Well, for me, all of the common theme that you just went through, all of those are sub-bullets to the people not being set up for success in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're parachuted in, that's suggesting that it had already been underway. There's already history there, and you're catching the train that already left the station. I don't like being put in that position. I'd much rather help organizations set projects up for success in the beginning. And part of that is about the environment and everybody speaking the same language. And in my book, Meet the Players in Project Land, there's a beginning part about why projects fail and some studies I found, and the common theme being people not being set up for success. And one of those is that they selected the project manager incorrectly. It wasn't the right project manager. They didn't have the skills, they weren't prepared. I wasn't the right project manager for that first job I got, but I got a bunch of guys surrounding me that made me that person I needed to be for that project. So in Project Land, there's a team, there are leaders, there's a project manager. Sometimes they don't have the right name. Sometimes they're not called the project manager, and so they don't even realize they're the project manager. I just was talking with a client the other day about this, and I said, well, wait a minute, what role are you in? She's like, well, I do this, blah, 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 these things. And I'm like, you sound like the project manager. She's like, what? Like, it's still happening,
Yeah.
So, to the extent that we can influence organizations, especially at the executive level first, to help create an environment where people are set up for success in the beginning, then things go so much more smoothly, don't they? I mean, a lot of the studies that I've gone through suggest that projects really fail in the beginning. Like, the symptoms may come out later, but really the root causes can be traced back to the beginning. And to me, the majority of the time they're about people. It's not because somebody downloaded the wrong template. It's because the people were not set up for success, for working together properly, for having enough time on it, for making the right decisions on time. There's a million reasons.
Yeah, they are. And I think you're right in terms of the glue that keeps us together, that's set up for success, regardless of, those two letters, A and I. Communication is a huge part of keeping people together, setting the scene.
Yes.
And I feel like we often pay it lip service. We talk about, we need to have good communication skills and stakeholder management. But what does that actually mean, right? What does it really mean on projects to bring people together? Because you can get two people that say exactly the same words, but one person will say it where they bring people together.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one will just say it and everyone will ignore them. Exact same set of words, right?
Yes.
And there's something about being human that technology can't replicate, where you feel what people are saying rather than hear it.
Right.
And it's when people feel that, I believe, is that when they feel they're part of something collectively together to try and achieve that outcome, that shared goal, that's when we're setting them up for success. As you say, regardless of titles or roles or whatever we call each other, if we know what our role is on the pitch — I like sports analogies, you like movies — if we know what
I
our
like
roles
sports
are.
analogies too.
Oh, there we go.
Meet the players. We're good.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. We can go for a few hours then.
Yes.
So, if everyone knows their job on the field, on the pitch, like what they need to do, and what the shared outcome is, then it doesn't matter what you're called. And a big part of that is, you look at any successful sports teams, communication is key, right? Knowing what the player next to you needs to do or expect of you, and vice versa. And I just feel that doesn't happen enough on projects. And, people might make excuses that, the teams are so big, we have thousands of people working on projects. But in reality, you're working in a small team day to day. What about just focusing on the people you're working with? Don't worry about the rest. Because the rest will happen if you just focus on those around you. I don't know. What's your tips on communication, or effective communication? Because, like I said, I feel a lot of the time we just pay lip service.
We do. I mean, in the Project Management Institute says 90% of a project manager's job is communication, 90%. So the first step is to take it seriously as part of your job, as a very key part of your job, and to realize it's the glue and the WD-40. And so part of what I learned is listening is half the job of communication. And you're not just listening for the words coming out of their mouth. You're listening for the feelings, for the vibe. You're listening for, well, how stressed are they? How nervous are they? And so forth. So this is, I alluded to it earlier, the thing I learned the hard way that might be a helpful tip for our friends listening is that when I was a project manager of this absolutely huge project, the number one biggest, hairiest, scariest project in this Fortune 500 company I worked for at the time, we had a project sponsor who was a wild animal. Like he was a finance guy and very much a people person. So he would do the management by walking around thing. And I would be leading a status meeting, very intense, and I'd say at the end of it, being the math major that I am, so what do you think, Dale, Val, what do you think? And you'd be like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Okay, you guys good? Yeah, we're good. Walk out of the room, run into him. He'd say, how do you feel? And you guys might answer him completely differently. He asked a different question. He said, how do you feel? I'd be like, dude, I'm nervous. I'm stressed. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make my anniversary dinner tonight with my wife. Like you would get guys, I just asked you, are you good? You said yes. What is going on? And then I realized I started to play with this. And I started to ask the question at the end of these meetings, how do we feel? And really trying to watch for the body language and hear the trepidation and pull out whatever wasn't being said, because it matters. Because I don't need you turning around and saying to him, I'm really nervous, because then what happens? Then I have to do disaster control. I should know this already. I need to know this as the project manager. So that's part of it for me, is the communication being completely honest, transparent, and allowable. You should be able to say, I'm nervous and I really want to make the dinner with my wife. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And, I think the thing, absolutely, communication skills key. The thing I'd challenge to the cynics out there, because listening to you, they might go, oh, okay, then it's a project manager's job because the PMI says project managers, it's their job. And my response to that would be, well, no, actually, it's everyone's job to communicate, sure, regardless of if you're the engineer, if you're the project controller, the planner, the risk manager.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter who you are. It is your job to communicate. You are a player on that pitch, and you're part of that team. Even between, as we call it here, main contractor, subcontractor, and client, you've got to talk to each other. You're trying to achieve the same goal. And often there's unnecessary friction that I think is human-made. It's not a real friction on a project. And that costs us millions. That costs us delays. And there's a lot at stake. But yeah, Val, let's bring you into this, because you love this communication topic as well. And I've worked with Val when he was still here in the UK, Dawn, and Val's communication needed translation. And funnily enough, the South African had to translate sometimes what he was saying. But
I remember those days very well, Dale. So we would, Dawn, we would have a full crew. We had quite a big team back there, maybe 50 people. We'd get them in a room. And actually, that was when we were parachuted in to a project that was already kind of underway, and it was going through some teething challenges with a very complex project. But the people had almost lost. I think we had half the people were kind of on their way out of the door.
Yeah,
and so we had a very low morale set. And I came in with all this super Australian energy. And, maybe it's my accent, Dale. I don't know. I was new to London as well, so I was in a new culture, even though my family's English. But again, the Australian slang there. And I looked and I did this big pitch about how we're going to work together and do all of this great stuff. And I looked at Dale, and Dale said, what Val means is, and then he goes and explains the exact same thing that I had explained in a much better way. Delivery matters, right? And the lesson there was, and that actually became a bit of a running joke with the team as well, is I would then go and say something. I said, Dale, can you explain this to the team? And then Dale would explain to the team, and they're like, all right, we got it now. So it was really, really helpful to have my co-pilot there, Dale, and work with the team but at the individual level, because what we realized, just talking about the feeling piece, is a really good phrase or turn of phrase to use at the end of a sentence, because a lot of people, especially before when we started the projects earlier on, no one cared about feelings. And we talked about diversity of thought and inclusion. And since that's come around, and well-being and mental health, we've realized that there's such an impact going on. And it's kind of this iceberg effect of, you don't really know what people are going through. And so when you don't always get the best version of someone at work, but you should be curious enough as a leader, as a project manager, to recognize those symptoms or those cues to say there's something behind this. Or if they do act out, or if there's some behaviors that don't match the team, why are they behaving like that? And I think having that sense of curiosity as a leader has also helped us with our team management, because then we're understanding the person as a whole. If you go into a doctor, a really good doctor will treat the whole patient, not just the symptoms. And so I think teamwork and team leadership is the same concept. And that was novel for us as well. We were learning as we were going, because that was early in our careers. But as we've kind of gone on more projects, we see the same thing repeating. And I think there's something in that education space back to how we communicate. And I get the PMI and the APM and the AACE and CASA and all of this great stuff. But what I haven't seen them do is apply any of what you're talking about today in their methodologies. They don't talk about the how. They talk about the what and maybe some of the why. But how come some of these institutions for education, from your perspective, Dawn, how come they haven't picked up some of these communication techniques to apply in team settings? Is there a reason, or you think that they're going to catch up eventually?
I think they're starting to catch up. So the PMBOK Guide 8th edition just came out, and I was told that storytelling is included as a technique and it's mentioned. Yes, okay. So we should all be proud that the volunteers for the PMBOK 8 have come around to what we all love, which is storytelling as a technique. So that's a good thing. So I think they're getting there. I think that part of the problem with some of these standards, that's great, but it's also a huge challenge, is it's run by volunteers. And so if we have a whole lot of cooks in the kitchen all adding their little sprinkles, it's going to make the soup brown. So it doesn't always turn out as delicious as we all would like it to, because there's this melding of ideas and so forth, and they have to compromise on some things. But that's why every couple of years you get a new edition. So
that's exactly right. And look, I do know how much effort goes behind the scenes on these.
Yeah,
and I could just imagine the debates that people have, just trying to get in what gets published and what doesn't get published, perhaps, and what's palatable in the local communities. But I think education is one of those big gaps where we, almost like your origin story, Dawn, you kind of get given the hat before you learn. And OJT, on the job training, is where most project managers will talk to you on this podcast, how they cut their teeth on a project. They got thrown in the deep end, and it's almost like survival for the first couple of months, just to figure out where they sit in the scheme of things. But what's a better way to do that, Dawn? How would you go about onboarding people if they were going through, landed a job like you, and they'll build it for success? They had the right leaders and mentorship in progress. What could they do? What resources could they utilize other than your books out there in the market? Because we've got so much information. And I think a lot of the time when I speak to younger people in our profession, they are just bombarded with information. Do I go with PMBOK? Do I do this? Right. Do I do some study? Where do they go to get some sense of orientation?
Well, if you're working on the job, the first place I would go is somebody that you respect on the job, that you think knows what they're doing in real life, and ask them. Because, if you're in England, it might be Prince 2. If you're in America, it might be PMI. So whatever the sort of process subscription is that is in your organization, go find it and study it in whatever way that you can. So hopefully there are some documents and so forth that you can take a look at, but talk to people, talk to mentors there. And I've certainly had people come to me that had no one they were the only person in their organization. They didn't have a boss they could ask for good advice. They knew they were getting bad advice, in fact, some of them. And so I actually created a course on purpose that I call Practical Project Management. And I created a certificate course around it. There have been different versions for different corporations. They wanted practical project management for everyone. And then people say, I'm the everyone. And I just love it when they do that, because that what they're saying is, I'm trying to learn now before I get thrown into this. Or I'm the engineer on the team and I want to understand this world of Project Land a little bit better so I can be a better team member. So that for the organizations that actually will support your learning, find a course that feels aligned to what is going to make you successful in your version of Project Land.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And I think Dale, something we've used before is understanding personality types and weaving into that the attributes of a person on a good day and a bad day. I don't know, Dawn, if you've done this before. We applied this across an organizational chart to understand insights of, okay, well, people have certain tendencies when they're working in a professional setting. What does that look like? And when we mapped it over the organizational chart, it made a lot more sense than how we would approach them and how they could communicate, knowing that, a red or a dominant type person on a bad day is very short, very, very arrogant, very quick to judge. Whereas on a good day, they're they'll make decisions, they'll get things done, they're action takers, they're self-initiating. So you could utilize that. But if you had too much of the red and not enough of the green or the yellow or the blue, you started to see a theme starting to emerge. And that was useful as well, just for educational purposes, to help the team cohese on these topics, because usually on projects we're under pressure a lot. And particularly in the PMO, where you're kind of managing communications up, which is a different type of comms and communication to managing down and out. So your stakeholders and your support team, you're trying to talk them through the problem, get them aligned. For management, they just want answers. They don't want surprises. How do you distinguish the difference between different types of communication, and how do you train that, Dawn? What's your view on that?
Well, it's funny. It sounds like you have a very similar workshop or method that I have, which is mine's communication styles. And so when we get to do that live with teams, it's amazing because people will self-select their style, and then they will see how people interact. So you will see that dominant corner, it going like this and then getting done first. They'll be like, "We're done."
Yeah.
And then you'll see this other corner, like basically hugging, and like lots of love is happening there. And so, then the analytics they're sitting back, they're nodding their heads. So what happens in the room, which is why I love being in the room with people still. I love the virtual. I love it that we can all meet across the world today. But I really love the in the room. Some of these workshops you can only do in the room like this, where then people can see it happening, and then they'll never forget who was opposite them, and they'll remember. And so then the communication becomes so much easier, because it's like, I'm not trying to be a jerk. That's just my communication style when I'm in the pressure cooker of Project Land. That's just the way it is. And then, so some of the feedback I've gotten from some of the executives that have asked me to do this for their teams has been, everybody got a lot nicer. It got a lot easier to work together, because there was this common understanding of, oh, that's your style. So when you ask questions, you're not being passive aggressive. It's just a real question for you. Oh, okay. That's nice. It's amazing. So there are definitely techniques like that, but executives have to want to invest the time and the money to do these things, to make Project Land better, to make the team experience and the teaming better. And there are a lot of pressures right now, I think, on budgets and and time pressures, where that's hard for people. So I would love to speak to more executives who have souls. The CXOs with the souls, those are my people. And I've met many, many of them and love them dearly, because they're willing to do these things. It takes an hour and a half. It's not a big deal, but getting everybody in the room these days can be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the currencies of exchange that doesn't get talked about much in communications, and I'll bring Dale in this conversation as well. There's a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Dawn. I don't know if you've
Yes.
heard, and
Yeah,
it's a
Patrick
fantastic.
Lencioni's. Mm-hmm.
He's a very passionate guy as well, just like you, Dawn. But he has a very small 5-minute video, and we actually turned that into a bit of a training pre-framer. So we would actually give that to our clients, particularly the C-suite and executives that were struggling to communicate with themselves. And we would say to them, because we're on the consulting side, we say, well, look, we can't direct, we can only advise. So there's no point us starting an engagement until you guys are working together. And hey, here's a training, self-fulfilling training session. And it starts with trust. And funnily enough, when you go around the room and you ask people what they think trust is, it's almost like they're emoting. There's a feeling behind what trust means, because trust isn't something that you can say, okay, I trust Dale because we worked together for 5 years. That's not necessarily what the author's talking about. What he's talking about is vulnerability and the exchange of trust and authenticity as well. And those two things work hand in hand when you're communicating something to a team. And so you can see when someone's being inauthentic almost immediately. I mean, I can pick it up now that I'm an old soul, I've been around for long enough. But when you're young, that trust element is really important, because that determines whether you look up to someone, whether you listen to them, whether you follow their instructions, whether you would go into battle with them, whether, just like the Martian reference, for the movie, whether you would science the shit out of anything for them if you didn't believe they were being authentic or had your best interests at heart. And I think that feeling concept comes back. And trust is something we use a lot, because the second layer of that is healthy conflict, which we try and encourage healthy conflict, because healthy conflict means everyone gets to speak what they're thinking, what they're feeling, whether they believe in the project solutions or whether they think Val's talking rubbish or whether Dale makes sense. And so moving into healthy conflict can only happen if you've got a circle of trust that everyone's being vulnerable together. And that is the bit that I think we need executives to kind of lean into a bit more. And it does take a bit of time. But again, if you do get that foundations right, then the rest will come and follow. Dale, I don't know if you've had any experiences like that where you've talked about trust with your team and what the impact has been of not having trust on a project.
Yeah, I mean, not just in my team, but generally anywhere you go, right? Any relationship you're building, it's built on trust. And we know it takes a lifetime to build up proper trust and, a millisecond to destroy it. And you got to work hard at it. It's not something that you just take for granted either. My personal approach is, when I'm working with someone new or meet someone new, I start from a place of trust. And, then if they lose it, they lose it. I know some people that do it the other way, is they don't trust people from the beginning, and you have to earn their trust. And so people are different, and you have to approach it differently. But I think it's equipping ourselves with the right skills to navigate relationships and different people, regardless of which angle they're coming from. But you touched on leadership there as well, Val, and this is where I want to sort of put this out to yourself, Dawn, where a lot of the times we try and assess a lot of people on their leadership skills and, where they are in their leadership journey. But I don't think everyone wants to necessarily be a leader. And what I've been doing the past couple of years is actually assessing people on ownership, not leadership. So do they own their role? If they're the grad, I can't assess them on leadership. They literally just have come out of university. They've never worked in an environment. And so how can that's so unfair, right? It's like trying to, assess how good a fish is at climbing a tree, right? And so what I can do, though, is I can assess them on ownership. Do they own their role, right? Do they own the position they're in right now? And that means different things depending on where they are in their career. And so for me personally, I place a lot more emphasis on owning your role in the team rather than assessing anyone on leadership. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it reminds me of just in life, how when you have to own your part. No matter what relationship or situation you're in, you have to own your part. And if you're blaming other people or complaining, that's an indication that you're not truly owning your part. So I feel like the ownership, I love that, Dale. I think that's brilliant. That's really, really important and would be very helpful for all the players in Project Land. And I find that in the roles and responsibilities in the beginning, part of what can be very confusing for people is they don't know what part they're supposed to own.
Yeah.
it hasn't been made clear, that if in their organization the lines are fuzzy and a project sponsor isn't fully defined as a project sponsor and the project manager isn't fully defined, like I was mentioning earlier, how she didn't even know she was the project manager. And then the team members, is it the team lead and they report to a project manager who's not their boss? Is that there have been so many times where the lines have been fuzzy, which is why I wrote Meet the Players in Project Land to say, hey, look, here's some typical roles and responsibilities that we see in Project Land. Use these to have conversations in your organization so that you can make it clear what the roles and responsibilities are, and you can recognize some of these creatures, the behaviors, which is some of what we've been talking about today, the behaviors that are normal, unfortunately in some cases normal in this pressure cooker of a world we're in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, Dawn, I know that you've got a hard stop as well, and I really want to thank you for your time, because I could literally talk to you for hours. I know, Val, you feel the same way, and I think we should definitely get you back for a follow-up, a part 2.
Oh, I'd love that. I could speak with you guys for a long time too.
There's so much we could explore, right? We've just, started the conversation in my mind. But look, we're heading towards the end of the pod. But before we let you go, are there any final thoughts that you want to leave out there, put out there for the listeners?
Well, if the word Project Land helps you, Val, Dale, and our listener today to explain this pressure cooker of a world that we're in to people, use it. And just use it and say, look, we're in Project Land. The roles and rules are different. There are different expectations. And I have certainly found that a lot of people feel better about that. Like, oh, okay, so what I'm experiencing and feeling right now is normal because I'm in a different place. Like astronauts have to learn to live without gravity to go to the moon, right? It's a different world with different roles and rules. So I just leave folks with that. And if that's helpful to people, please let me know.
Is there gravity on Project Land?
There's a very heavy gravity sometimes on Project. Yes.
Yeah.
Extra.
Yeah. Amazing. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, Dawn, it's been an absolute pleasure. Again, if we're in the US, we'll definitely look you up. And if you're down in Oz or London, get in touch with us. You have 2 books to plug as well. Do you want to plug those books real quickly?
Sure. We've got Meet the Players in Project Land, which is my first book. And the subtitle is Decide the Right Project Roles and Get People on Board. And so there's some good stuff in that one for the beginning of projects and setting them up for success, which we talked about. And then there's our new book, Project Land Goes to the Movies, 22 Blockbuster Strategies for Project Success, with 22 different chapters, 22 movies, and 22 different voices. So giving lots of ideas for how you can use movies to explain your world. So thanks.
Awesome.
Love it.
Awesome
Thanks
stuff.
again, Dawn.
Been absolutely amazing. Like I say, we should definitely continue the movie theme on the follow-up. But look, folks, that is the end of this episode. If you like what you've heard, please do help us and pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to Dawn, our guest on the show, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.